Well, hello to you all once again, and welcome back to what is fast becoming known as one of the best channels on YouTube to talk about and take a look at old vintage race bikes. So thanks and welcome to Classic Dirt Bike TV. Now, as we head towards the 13,000 subscribers total, I'd like to say thanks to all the brand new subscribers who have recently signed up in the last few weeks. And I think over the last month or so, we've had over 150 brand new subscribers to my channel. So thanks to each and every one of you for your continuing support. Okay, next up, we're going to take a look at another old vintage racer, and this time round we're going to take a look at Scottish rider Kevin Smith's quite nice looking 440 Maico Twinshocker. Now, as you're no doubt aware, these old 81 German Maicos are the staple diet for thousands of riders across the globe, and they are without question possibly the most popular of all the vintage race bikes, thanks of course to the legacy that was left behind by the iconic 81 Maico 490 Mega 2, which even in this modern day is still regarded as the best open class motocrosser ever made. Now, this featured bike of Kevin's certainly looks like your average 1981 440 Maico Twinshock racer, although Kevin's bike here is actually a little bit of a hybrid, and it's certainly not an original bike, but nevertheless a nice looking piece of kit and one of the most popular bikes with riders who race in the Twinshock or pre-1984 class. Now, beginning with the bike's frame, and straight away it may look like this is just another 1981 Maico chassis, although this is actually a 1982 Alpha 1 frame that's been modified to take a Twinshock rear swing arm. Now, this bike of Kevin's is just one of two Maicos, or Maicos if that's the way that you prefer to pronounce it, but Kevin also races a 1983 250 Spider as well, which he brings out from time to time. And although this bike is a world apart from your standard red and yellow original Maico livery, it just goes to show you that the many different options that you have to personalise your own Maico Twinshock racer. Now, Kevin's bike, as you're no doubt aware, is powered by this quite nice 440 piston port two-stroke power plant, and I can personally vouch for the power and reliability of these engines, as I had the exact same motor in my old 1980 bike when I did a bit of racing back in the day. Now, these engines were maybe never as meticulously engineered as, say, a Japanese bike, and if you've ever had a chance to dismantle one of these Maico engines and see how they're all bolted together, it's quite amazing really how their sum of parts all fit together. Now, the fuel, of course, for these big Maicos was supplied by these very capable Bing carburetors, which for their day weren't the most complicated fuel and air mixers of their time, but they were superb at making horsepower when they were feeding this big thirsty motor with its gas and air. Now, because Kevin's bike's not an original machine, it has many replacement parts fitted onto it, starting with this black ignition cover, which is a part from Race Base. Now, the primary drive sprocket cover next to it is again by Race Base, as of course are those very wide heavy duty foot pegs. Now, that replacement alloy brake pedal is again an upgraded part from Maico only, who, as you know, made all manner of shiny bits and pieces for these German racers some years ago. Now, naturally, during the build of Kevin's bike, this motor of Kevin's, as you'd expect, was fully stripped and then rebuilt, and all the engine work was done by Nori Patti at 3L Racing, who does all manner of motocross race bike preparations, including specialising in those Czechoslovakian CZ vintage racers. Now, these replacement billet alloy triple clamps are once again top quality items, and these were supplied by Racebase in the UK, who manufacture all manner of replacement parts for these Twinshock Maicos, and a few of the other smaller items on Kevin's machine, like the rear brake rod, were once more supplied by Simon Gower at Racebase. Now, when it comes to the front forks on Kevin's bike, these are your standard Maico suspension units, although these, of course, once again were given the full upgraded treatment and were serviced and set up once again by those very talented engineers at Racebase. Now, as you can see, the Maico's original front brake back plate has been swapped for this CNC machined alloy replacement, and these plastic front fork guards are again not a standard Maico item, but these are supplied by DC Plastics from the USA, and these can be quite a useful item to help keep stones and other track debris from damaging those soft alloy fork stanchions. And once again, more upgrades on Kevin's bike. These wheels are a set of replacement SM Pro alloy units from Barry Brown, and these were of course rebuilt and then respoked onto the Maico hubs. Now, Kevin's also added a pair of these Acerbis fork socks. These again are supposed to try and help to keep dust and dirt out of the suspension's fork seals. Now, the rear wheel, as you'd expect, underwent the very same treatment as the front, as it also was completely rebuilt and respoked, but thankfully Kevin's resisted the temptation to paint the rims black, which seems to be the colour of choice for quite a lot of these kind of vintage race bikes these days. Now, it's quite good to see that one of these Maicos still using their original steel swing arms, as many riders did tend to swap these for alloy replacements, although I do know of a few instances where riders have reverted back to these original steel units because the softer, lighter alloy parts were showing signs of twisting and cracking. Now, once again, as you can see, Kevin's spared absolutely no expense when it's come to his bike's rear suspension system, and these top quality Swedish made Öhlins piggyback units are just about as good as you could ever get for a Twinshock racer. Now, these parts were supplied by SS24 Suspensions and were serviced and set up specifically for Kevin by none other than Scottish motocross racing legend Willie Simpson. Of course, other good suspension systems are available for these Maicos, and many of them certainly do a great job, but for me personally, if you can't get your bike to handle properly with a set of these Öhlins on the back, then it's probably best to try and take up another sport. Now, the exhaust again on Kevin's bike is another replacement for the German-made original, but virtually all of these Maico Twinshockers these days now have replacement expansion chambers fitted because, let's face it, these old vintage Twinshockers are now clocking on to almost 41 years old now, so it's hardly surprising that it doesn't have all of its factory fitted parts from 1981. And this rear alloy PFR or Pro Form Racing tailpipe is another replacement for what would have been a steel part back in the day, and once more these are again another popular fitment on many vintage race bikes these days. Now these Maico fuel tanks are of course made of plastic, as Maico soon changed from the more popular alloy fuel cells of the 1970s to these plastic varieties in 1980. Now this particular seat on Kevin's bike is a standard Maico item, although naturally it has a new style seat cover fitted, which was supplied by Alan Reed at MXM Graphics, who also supply many other decals and parts for these old school Maicos. Now this alloy CNC machined brake backplate is an upgraded replacement to the much thinner item that would have been bolted onto this bike back in 1981, and this part is supplied by Bill Brown at Willsport in the UK. And this quite purposeful looking bottom chain guide is another part that was available from Maico only, who, it has to be said, did supply some quite nice parts for these Maico Twinshockers, although as I recall these bits and pieces weren't cheap and a bit pricey. But in the bike's controls department, a good set of Magura levers and their covers have been added, and these covers did try and keep dust and dirt out of the lever pivots. Now a decent Magura throttle gasser again here, just to help control the many horses waiting to spring out of that 440 Maico motor. But these are all top quality items, and this decompressor lever is an absolute must just to try and help you kick that Maico engine into life. But Kevin's also fitted an engine kill switch, which is a mandatory requirement if you want to race this bike at classic or Twinshock events in the UK. Now I'm assuming that by now you've probably guessed that there's not many original parts on Kevin's Maico, and like I said, very few of these bikes these days have their factory fitted bits and pieces, and these race base heavy duty wide foot pegs are again replacements, but certainly these are a decent upgrade and a huge improvement over the skinny Maico originals. Now all of the bike's black plastics were supplied by Maico only, and maybe this black theme on Kevin's machine won't appeal to the Maico purists out there who only really want their old Maicos to be painted in red and yellow, but the parts that you can buy for these bikes these days is so vast and varied, and it's quite an easy task to personalise your own Maico racer, just as Kevin has done here. But it's probably quite fair to say that you couldn't get any further away from an original example of an 81 440 Maico than this bike of Kevin's, because apart from maybe the frame, the motor and the front forks and swing arm, many of its other parts have either been changed or upgraded. But despite that, it's still a very nice looking machine, and during the winter of 2021 Kevin's already planning more changes to his Maico by fitting a replacement Maico chassis from BZS Racing in Holland, who make top quality frames for these iconic machines. So who knows, maybe next year we could do a follow-up video to see what changes Kevin's actually made on his old racer, but that's exactly what makes these 81 Maicos such a popular choice with thousands of vintage racers around the globe. There's so much that you can do with these bikes with regards changing parts and fitting upgrades, but of course the best and most important feature of all is that you have in your possession your very own interpretation of what is still regarded as the best motocross race bike ever made. Well, there you have it. I do hope you enjoyed that quite brief look around Scottish rider Kevin Smith's quite nice 440 Twinshock Maico. Not a fully original bike, of course, but as I said, very few of these older 80s Maicos are original these days, but nonetheless a very nice looking machine. Okay, coming up in my next video posting, we're going to take a look at a bike that I came across while I was over in Northern Ireland during 2021, and we're going to take a look at this very nice CZ Twinshock machine. Now, this is a bike that belongs to Irishman Adrian Lappin, so we'll be taking a quick look around Adrian's bike in my next video posting here on my channel. But of course, until then, everybody continue to be safe and well while you're out there riding those old vintage racers. And I'm sure that we'll all get together again quite soon to talk about more vintage iron right here on your favourite #1 dirt bike channel, Classic Dirt Bike TV.